Hello and welcome back to another episode of the 2020 podcast, bringing clarity to business, entrepreneurship, and life. I am your host, Dr. Harbir Sian. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me, guys. As always, truly, truly grateful for all the support. Before we jump into the episode, I always like to ask one small favor, and that is if you get any value out of this episode or any episode that you've listened to, please do share it, whether you take a screenshot and put it up on Instagram, tag me and my wonderful guest today. Or more importantly, if you could make sure you hit like, hit subscribe, leave a review. All of those things mean so much and really, really help the podcast grow. And as always, I'm trying to bring on guests who can really inspire us to do more, to think outside the box, to consider all the potential opportunities we have, not just our, the opportunities that we see kind of on the path ahead of us, but totally thinking outside of the box. And I think my guest today is absolutely amazing and perfect for that. I am very, very fortunate to have Dr. Sanjay Sharma, who is a retinal specialist and professor of ophthalmology at Queen's University. A clinical scientist, he has authored over 250 research papers and 3 books, including the American Medical Association's Evidence-Based to Value-Based Medicine. Dr. Sharma has obtained over $2 million in research funding to study diverse areas, including the microbiome, health economics, patient safety, and digital education. He has received significant innovation and teaching awards, including those from the Canadian Foundation for Innovation, the Association for Faculties of Medicine in Canada, and the American Academy of Ophthalmology. A passionate supporter of innovation and education, Dr. Sharma has spearheaded the creation of OptoCase, which I'm sure many listeners have heard of, which upskills 21,000 optometrists, and MEDSKL, which helps medical students from over 400 plus universities become outstanding clinicians. Dr. Sharma completed his medical education at Wills Eye Hospital and Harvard University. Wow. And that's not all of it. There's still more. So Dr. Sharma, I first got to kind of meet you during the OptoCase game show, which was just a few weeks back. And half joked that, you may as well put in there, like, also the most interesting man in the world, and I'll hand you a bottle of Dos Equis while you stand there, because really this is amazing. And some of the other stuff you shared with me that day was really awesome. So thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
No, Harbir, it's my pleasure to be here. It's looking forward to having this conversation for sure.
Awesome. Well, I know I've given a pretty nice background of who you are and what you do, but I'd like to get a little bit more kind of deeper than the bio.
Sure.
Tell me a little bit about your education, your work background, kind of how you ended up where you are today. Any key things that you can think of?
Yeah, when people ask me that question, I generally start from the very beginning.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I mean, I was kind of sort of pulled into the eye world in a sense. It's kind of a bit of a sad story, I guess. But when I was a teenager, my mom was playing tennis and was hit with a tennis ball.
Oh, wow.
And so quickly we realized she lost her a lot of vision quite significantly, and so next thing we take her to the emergency room, and so she was diagnosed with a retinal detachment. And so I actually went to medical school to become a retinal specialist, because
Wow.
At that time I started to immerse myself in the retina and just think a lot more about it. So, that was really the starting point. I'm from the East, and I should say my mom had a sclerobuckle and she ended up doing okay.
Oh, good.
Grew up on the East Coast, Nova Scotia, and it was wonderful, kind of wonderful existence there. Ended up, going to Queen's University for my residency in ophthalmology. I just, at some point, I guess in my residency, just became really interested in evidence-based medicine. So after I finished my residency, went to grad school, and people are like, why are you going to grad school after becoming an ophthalmologist? But again, felt really just kind of interested and passionate about it. So I did a master's in epidemiology, and then ended up doing, 3 fellowships in retina, the last 2 at Wills and Mass Eye and Ear. And then knew that I really wanted to, create solutions for problems in a very scalable way. So when I came back to Canada, and as an attending, also went to grad school for a second time, and did my executive MBA. And then, ever since then, I've just sort of been following this kind of eclectic journey where it's been sort of passion driven. And if I see something that I'm kind of interested in, we kind of, and I guess that, part of your question is like, what drives, things forward. And really it's, I guess, maybe some, just kind of an inquisitive spirit and just wanting to come up with solutions and wanting to have a positive impact on people.
Wow. That's incredible. First of all, the story that kind of led you into eye care in the first place, it's rare that you have such a passionate, impactful story that really just leads you down a path with so much sort of motivation to become that person, that one thing that you wanted to be. I'm glad to hear your mom did okay after that. But then, wow, multiple fellowships, multiple graduate degrees, an MBA, all of that. That's insane to me. That's so much. I don't know how one person can do all of that. That's really impressive. Obviously, you have this sort of enterprising and sort of entrepreneurial spirit. It's very, very strong and very obvious. I'd like to know, like, when did you ever like, did it consciously realize that you had that, or, was it just sort of this underlying current that you didn't really think about?
Yeah. So before I'm going to answer that question, I'm just going to kind of laugh at your, something that you said, because my kids yesterday were sort of laughing about I don't know if you've got, some of your listeners are Kanye fans or not, but there's a lyric in one of his songs about, college degrees and, essentially having the ability to burn the pieces of paper. So it kind of made me laugh a little bit, but yeah, it's kind of been an interesting, sort of journey, and the specifically kind of the entrepreneurship thing. I think it's something that was pretty early on, and so I'm going to take you back to when I was 12 years old, and I had this great setup. So one of my buddies named Ashley, and we would I used to play a lot of competitive tennis, and so we would play tennis in the mornings, get on our bicycles. And then drive probably about 10 kilometers on like major freeways and stuff like that, which is probably not recommended nowadays.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
And what we did was we had the perfect gig. Like we would buy ice cream at wholesale, for like 50 cents or something like that, and sell it for $2. And we were in this industrial park. And so we had a list of like 100 or 150 like big burly guys. And we would literally sell out our ice cream in about an hour and 15 minutes. So it was probably more money than I've ever made per hour. But that was really the first sort of venture, I guess, into a structured business. Now, I'd love to say that I, had the foresight to invest in Bitcoin or something like that, way back then, but we bought like Liquimate and chips and stuff like that. So I'm not sure we really kept it on the balance sheet, so to speak. But yeah, I mean, after that, it's been just doing a lot of really interesting things. When I sort of finished my graduate degree, my business degree, it was just this weird space where, the back of the eye became sort of a pharmaceutical concern, I guess. And it just so happened that at that time we were creating health economics models, in the peer-reviewed literature. And so, a number of companies started tapping us so that, kind of one of the next companies, or one of the first, I guess, companies out of for medicine that we created was really a consulting and health economics company where we would do strategic pricing based on mathematical models. And so it was kind of applied math sort of company. And so it was, it was a pretty fun thing. But, what I try to do in the entrepreneurial world is just really look for A, things that I'm passionate about, and B, things where I can add a lot of value. So those have been sort of the guiding principles, I guess.
Wow, that's amazing. One of my favorite entrepreneurs, if you'd say, is really an icon. I grew up in England as a kid. I was born in London, England, and I lived there for the first 10, 12 years of my life. So that 80s and 90s, Richard Branson was a huge figure, the founder of Virgin.
Oh, I love, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
He's definitely, again, like kind of an icon for me. And, read his book and other stuff related to him. And he always tells you he's kind of had this entrepreneurial spirit since he was little. And he used to talk about selling things or Christmas trees or something. I can't remember what it was as a kid. And I've heard other, successful entrepreneurs talk about the feel that they realize as a young person, like you did when you were 12, you did these things to make some money. So pretty cool that you had that. And then as you kind of went on, did you then deliberately pursue those types of endeavors, or were you kind of more like, I'm going to go to med school, I'm just going to focus on med school? Did you
Yeah, it's
consciously
a
do
great
that?
question. Yeah. So, there's probably another thing that makes sense for us to chat a little bit about as a driving force for me. And because the more and more I think about it now, the more and more I realize how important it was in my life. And so,
Mm.
for a very, and like, I don't hold myself out to be this phenomenal musician or anything, but I was introduced, to alternative music and kind of punk rock at a very early age.
Oh,
And so it was this kind of, I liked really for lack of a better way of saying it, it's just sort of kind of an alternative way of thinking,
uh-huh.
which embraces kind of you know some arts related things. And so when I got into medicine, it was a very structured, evidence based, that sort of thinking, and so I wasn't really thinking about entrepreneurship. But what I felt was lacking the more and more I progressed in my medical career was this kind of creativity.
Mm.
And so when I talk about entrepreneurship, I'm super glad that you brought up Richard Branson, because Richard Branson, I think in a lot of ways is not the prototypical entrepreneur. He's not a balance sheet driven sort of guy. He's
Mhm.
more a solutions kid in a candy shop, and then just wanting to go and push, whether it's Virgin Atlantic or the record business or space exploration. That's the kind of guy that I love. So
Mm.
I really do think being immersed at a young age into kind of the alternative music scene and playing in bands on the East Coast and that kind of stuff was really a large driver of some of the products that we've brought to market and the innovation that we've used in a lot of different things that that we've been passionate about. So a little less bottom line driven and a little more wanting to create innovative ideas and
I
take
like
them to
that.
market.
That's so cool. Yeah, I didn't even know that part about you, the musical side. And interesting that specific type of music, alternative or punk rock, that type of music, you felt like really helped you kind of think outside the box. Very cool to hear that. I feel like we're just constantly adding to the legend of Dr. Sanjay Sharma here. You're throwing out Kanye quotes. You're into punk rock. Like, this is pretty cool stuff, man. Definitely. I'm happy to have you. This is helping me kind of make this podcast even better. I appreciate it. So let's keep on that entrepreneurial thing there. How do we, sorry if you hear a little bit of background noise here. Kids are about to have lunch, so they're going to be doing their own version of making some music upstairs, I think now. What advice would you give to, young, entrepreneurial minded or kind of ambitious, of course, we're mostly kind of touching medical professionals here, with healthcare professionals with this podcast. So people in that realm, do you have any specific advice or things that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I would sort of position it in two different ways. So let's just talk about non kind of medical entrepreneurs for a second. So it obviously applies to medical entrepreneurs, but maybe in a different sort of sequence of events, I guess. So I think the first thing is you just have to be authentic, right? Like, so don't show up and try to be the next Kanye, the next, Branson or whatever. Focus on being what's true to you. And I really do think, like, each one of us were kind of placed on this earth to do something unique, right? So, whether it's punk rock, whatever you're leveraging, all of these inputs, but then your output has to be really, truly unique.
Mhm.
Then I would say, in the medical entrepreneur space, I mean, you do have to dedicate a certain number of years to your craft, right? So whether it's, doing the 4 years of medicine and then ophthalmology and fellowships, or optometry, whatever that is. And then you need to sort of, I mean, it's, unless you want to go out and, create a franchise around the next PETA or this or that and make a totally lateral change. I do think, you do have to spend some time understanding the kind of the core of what it is that you're going to take to the next level.
Right.
But then beyond that, I think it's so critical. There's a great line really that just says, your ceiling is the ceiling of the 4 or 5 people around you that you spend the most time with. And so, being present to just great input, whether it truly is, mentorship, or whether it's reading a great book, listening to a great podcast, going to a great seminar. Like, I think that stuff is really important, to start opening your mind to lateral moves. And again, whether it's coming from music icons, whether it's coming from business icons, distilling some of those key teaching lessons will take you to a certain point much faster than you would otherwise.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for that fantastic advice. Actually, as you were speaking, there's something about what you said about, earlier about Branson and how you kind of approach, kind of problem solving versus, bottom line thinking or whatever, looking for solutions to problems out there. There's another entrepreneur, an author named Jay Samet. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of him before, but I've just learned of him this year, but he's ultra successful over the last couple decades. But one of the things he writes in his book is, if you want to be that type of solutions-based thinker, you want to solve a problem for somebody, is like every single day, write down 3 problems that you come across or 3 things that you think that could be improved somehow, and do that for 30 days. You'll have 90 things on your list. Probably 90% of them are not doable or relevant or have been done already, but there may be a small percentage of what you find in that 1 month that could be a problem that you solve. And I find that relevant with what you're saying about being involved in your career and actually understanding your profession first and looking for those little problems that maybe you could find solutions to, right? So really cool to hear, coming from you as well, somebody who's done so many things entrepreneurial. And I think one of the problems that you tried to solve, let's go into OptoCase and med school here. One of the problems I assume that you saw was that there was a need for providing education and information in different forms. I'd love to hear the backstory of OptoCase. And I keep calling it med school, but I assume that's what it is, even though it's MEDSKL, right?
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because that was the original intention, but the vast majority, I would say, 50-50. Half people call it med school, half of them call it MEDSKL.
Oh, that makes sense.
And it can go, it's kind of like great art, it's open to interpretation.
Yeah, I like that.
And just before we answer that specific question, I love what you said, in terms of systematizing innovation, coming up with 3 ideas every day. And I think a lot of great products and services were really developed by people who, needed that for themselves. And that really, as I transition into answering your question, when I look back on, when I was a medical student, I was not, a traditional learner in the sense of I didn't love, listening to people, the kind of sage on the stage model. I was much more, video based for me is awesome. Like I love it. I was also a kid that, I would have like 10 different textbooks open simultaneously, right? So I didn't just want to memorize 3 points. I wanted to go, well, how does the retina really connect over here? And then obviously, I got another textbook open. Then, well, how does it, relate to this particular pathway? And so I just wanted to make a lot of these lateral connections. And so that really was the basis for a lot of the thinking around, how we're trying to solve the medical education problems or, the optometry, problems. And so each one of those, I think, was a little bit different. So, for instance, OptoCase, what I realized is that, there was a lot of great optometrists out there who just weren't getting exposed to kind of, great clinical tips. And that was, how we really started out. And so I started doing the clinical tips. And then I realized, I wanted to bring in some of my buddies in cornea and neuro and all sorts of things like that. And that's how we really, started to grow. And, we do OCT tips. And then obviously we started to do live events and things like that too. And the feedback we're getting is that it's just, it's a nice collaborative thing between ophthalmology and optometry, because I think, sometimes that's not quite the case. And then B, I think for me to be able to touch, just literally thousands of people around the world, I think is pretty exciting. And the stage that I'm at in my career is, if I can touch really every single eye doctor across the world, and I think technology is allowing that to happen, that really excites me. And then moving to med school, it was the same. It was, probably about 4 or 5 years ago, where, I gave a lecture on acute visual loss, and I like to think, maybe your intro is going to my head, but I like to think that I'm a relatively dynamic lecturer. But honestly, within like 2 minutes of me, starting like talking about a retinal artery occlusion case or something like that, like half of the medical students were, I could see them like secretly like on YouTube and like Facebook and stuff like that. I was like, man, like at first I was kind of irritated, And then as I was thinking more about it, like as I was driving home, I was going, there's like just something fundamentally different, from the way we used to learn from the way we're learning now. And, the kids are just wired differently. It's like, YouTube. I mean, they've literally grown up in a world where there's YouTube and just emerging platforms that are video and animation based. And so by the time I got home, it was like, I don't know if you've seen the movie Jerry Maguire or not, but
Mhm.
it was kind of like my Jerry Maguire moment. And for 2, 3, 4 hours late at night, I kind of wrote out exactly the skeleton for what med school was going to be. And then of course, I hit the roadblock when I realized, like, how am I going to actually teach all of these different lessons? And so that's where it's funny enough, I talked to my dean. I said, hey, this is what I'm going to do. And he's like, I think that's a great idea for ophthalmology. I'm like, it's not just ophthalmology, it's everything. Right. So, it started like I must have sent out like 5,000 emails to award-winning professors all over the place.
Yeah.
But we locked in on, 200. And so med school really is all of medicine. It's like acute visual loss, chronic visual loss, chest pain, coughing up blood. It's really the core presentations that every medical school in the kind of developed world teaches around. And so that was super exciting to do. We did it all in animation, so I kind of say it's like Pixar meets your typical textbook, and it's the kids. The kids are loving it. We've got 300 student ambassadors from all over the world now. So it's a lot of fun, and it's pretty exciting.
Wow, that's really amazing to. I always find, like, first of all, the vastness of what you already have accomplished. And it sounds like, you still want this to grow, which is really cool. But, was it over 20,000 optometrists who have used OptoCase, and kids from over 400 different schools using med school? That's massive already. I'm just curious how, like, I guess you get people kind of monitoring this now, but like, how is it running? Is it just doing its own thing now, or are you constantly kind of getting your hands in there and making, being involved?
Yeah, no, I'm told I just push new initiatives within there, so and I'll happy to share it with your users that we're just around the corner. We're going to be announcing a sponsorship with RBC. Wow. So it's kind of like just different, it's different, pushing things to the next level, new streams of content. Just innovative, even like the I Know game, that didn't exist 6 months ago. And we came up with the idea, launched it, and people love it. So now we're systematizing it, getting into we're going to be working with a lot more, optometry students. So similarly with OptoCase, we've got now 30 optometry students who are starting to help out. So it's it's a fun thing to come up with an idea and then test it out. I don't want to come across as thinking like all of our ideas are great, because a lot of them haven't been great, or just have been difficult to scale.
Sure.
So we were so far ahead of the curve on some ideas that that's a whole other conversation. But there's a great book called Crossing the Chasm, and it's it was written by Jeffrey Moore, and it's the idea of sometimes you're just too early, like in terms of, Facebook. There was obviously social networks before Facebook, but they were just too early on, and there's, if you look at the history of technology, there's been so many different things that just have been too early. The market really wasn't there. The technology wasn't there, or, some piece of the distribution channel wasn't there yet.
Yeah. Interesting. You mentioned Facebook, because they're making another big leap now, which would be interesting to see if they're too early or if they're on time. Cause I think it's one that's a lot of people having trouble wrapping their heads around, but yeah, very interesting. And Crossing the Chasm, interesting you mentioned that book, because literally the question I had in my mind now that I wanted to ask you was, I know people personally, but I know there's a lot of people out there who have an idea that seems like a great idea, but then they're like, it's probably too much work. And then, 6 months later, they'll be like, oh my God, I thought about that myself. I could have done that. So, there's a lot more of those people than there are other people who have the idea and then actually cross the chasm or make that step. Can you tell me, can you think of anything tangible or thoughts that you have that helped you go through that? Like, you saw the kids in your classroom who are watching YouTube or Facebook, or, they're checking out for one reason or another, but you went home and you're like, how do I fix that? And you came up with this idea. You actually worked on it. Was there something in there that got you from having the thought to actually doing it that you can think about?
Yeah, it's funny. I don't know if you've seen, there's, very sort of personality profile tests that are out there. One of them is called Kolbe, which starts with a K, Kolbe. Mm-hmm. And, there's certain people who are kind of, just fast starters,
Hmm.
and so, and sometimes that's to their detriment. But, it's kind of one of those things where, you either start that night or at least sleep on it. And if it's still like, if it's one of these things that just drives you, then I think you have to do it, and I think, I don't know, it becomes this really deep-seated thing that you want to move it forward. I mean, that's it for me. And you just, I don't know, it becomes this consuming drive to
Hmm.
want to see this thing come. I mean, I don't want to scare your listeners away, but I think that yeah, I mean, that's just the honest truth to it. If it becomes something that's deep-seated and you will know that you were meant to do this
Hmm.
when it's like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning and it's pulling you out of bed to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that concept, and I don't think that, I hope that doesn't scare anybody. It's really nice to hear that genuine answer. Like you really felt the pull, but again, maybe that's part of your personality also, that you get drawn into things like that. But, I've had those experiences myself where you wake up from like a dream or something related to the thing that you're considering doing, or, um, and again, not to constantly throw out quotes on that, but there's a motivational speaker named Eric Thomas. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of him, but he always says that if you want to succeed, or you want to do that thing so as bad as you want to breathe, that's kind of when you have to do it, right? And I think that's relevant to what you're saying there. And again, yeah,
Absolutely.
maybe that sounds a little heavy, right? But it truly does feel that way sometimes when you have this idea that you really want to pursue.
Yeah, you know what? And I would also just kind of add on that. I mean, I think the second thing too is there's just certain dynamics that at a macro level, I think we're just meant to play out, right? So there's certain times in life where you meet people where you just go, and I really do believe this, where you just sort of go, I was meant to meet this person, and there's a reason, and it kind of unlocks or opens a door into your thinking or to your maybe the way you're executing something. And there's another quote, because I know it's clear that you enjoy quotes. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't know who exactly was the first person to say it, but they also say, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And
Mm.
there's so many times in my life where, maybe there was a block in a certain, maybe I'm going to call it execution, step. And then suddenly, whether it's reading something or you meet someone and then you just sort of go, wow, like the hair on your back of your arms just sort of stand up, this is
Yeah.
really kind of a metaphysical sort of experience. And
Yeah.
you just sort of realize it's sort of the cosmic world sort of opening the doors.
Yeah, I like that. I really do. And I believe that as well, quite strongly, that there are other forces at play, and hopefully things kind of align when they're supposed to align. Absolutely. And that's another one of those things that we could have a whole separate conversation on, that one, and Bitcoin and some of the other stuff that we've mentioned here as we've gone through. I'd like to, maybe let's shift gears kind of back to specifically eye care then for a minute. Obviously you have a lot of interest in innovation. You've spent a lot of time thinking about it, working on innovation. I'd like to hear just, off the top of your head, if you have any ideas about kind of where the eye care industry is heading, any cool innovation that you see coming up, or disruptions that you see coming up that maybe we need to be a little more on top of.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few. I mean, obviously the whole kind of I'm going back like 10, 15 years ago, there was really no back of the eye sort of injectable thing. So I think there's kind of micro changes that are going to happen, whether there's sort of longer acting agents, more sustained release products coming to market. I would say that those are sort of in the near future. It's funny enough, I was on the board of directors of a company called eSight. And again, this was like 10, 12 years ago when they were just coming up with, low vision kind of devices. And that was a really quite an exciting thing where, I mean, I still remember, Conrad Lewis, who was the founder of that company, talking to me about the future of the world is going to be the next screen in our palm. And that was really, before like iPhones had kind of exploded and stuff. And so, I think it's going to be a marriage. There's certainly going to be medicines that take us to the next level, but I think there's going to be a lot of marrying, technology, just telemedicine, telemonitoring of patients. I think is going to be really interesting. And then I think, moving to really, really kind of small technology. You mentioned that I do some research in the microbiome, and I think that that's going to be a really big, interesting area, whereby we're just starting to learn more and more about how the microbiome, and for your listeners, the microbiome is really, the viral, the bacterial load. For instance, in our intestines, we probably have about 4 to 5 pounds of bacteria. And so, we're starting to understand that, certain conditions like uveitis are linked to, changes in the microbiome of the gut, for instance. And so we have a protocol where we're actually looking at the microbiome in, inflammatory ocular conditions. And so, I think there's going to be changes at macro and micro levels. So I think it's really a pretty cool time. And I think the other big thing is, the fact that there's been a lot of very successful biotech and pharmaceutical companies in the back of the eye really stimulates innovation. So it's because they're successful, people in those first couple of rounds, they're cashing out and they're going, hey, you know what, I'm going to fund the next innovation thing. So you're seeing, money flowing in, whether it's, private equity, angel investors, VCs willing to really back eye care companies, whether they're, again, biotech or technology companies. So I think it's really cool because, that's the other thing we really didn't mention is it's great to have an idea, but to really take it to market, requires some finance or some funding, and then really to scale out even requires more, right? So
yeah, well, yeah, you're right actually. So that's actually cool to hear that there are people looking to invest in eye care specifically. So if somebody in our industry has an idea now, they probably have more of an opportunity to get it out there than they might have 10 years or 20 years ago. So that's really cool to hear. The microbiome is something that I find really fascinating. I actually do listen to a lot of stuff like podcasts and things by certain people in healthcare who talk a lot about the microbiome, and the gut is like the second brain, and and the things like that, and how so many of our conditions and diseases can actually be traced back to an unhealthy gut microbiome. And while to think specifically eye conditions, uveitis or something like that, who would have thought, like, we know the body's connected, everything's, but who would have thought that specifically your gut would be related? That's really fantastic to hear. I'm really interested to learn more about that when that information becomes more readily available to us.
Absolutely.
Couple more questions as we kind of head down towards the wrapping up here a little bit, but there was something I read on your LinkedIn recently that you wrote. I just found it a really fascinating story. I'd love for you to share, but you wrote a post or article about the 2 surgical fathers of your career. And I think you kind of referenced, it was sort of like that Rich Dad, Poor Dad, sort of the book, that kind of concept, right? You had 2 different people, 2 different theories or personalities. I love it, just for the sake of, I thought it was an interesting story. If you wouldn't mind sharing it, because I think it's relevant.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, this is going back, again to, I think, probably first year residency. And so I had these 2 very, very almost like diametrically opposed, surgeons. And one whose name was Dr. Kerr, was this just, really, he wanted us to think about innovation. He wanted us, if a capsule broke, what would you do? If this happened, what would you do? Could you do this with your right hand and your left hand? And so he was really, to me, the master of innovation and just thinking through things, and wanted us to have this incredibly broad ability to think and to be able to operate. And at the other end of the spectrum was a phenomenal teacher, Dr. Wendell Willis. And he was all about, when I trained, it was kind of the era of extra cap, and we were laying down, 5, we would make, an incision and put down 5 sutures in. And literally he taught us how to use our hands and be so precise that 24 hours, the next day when we would do the post-op assessment, they would have 20/20 vision. So there really would be zero. There would just be enough tension in those sutures to seal the wound, but nothing else to induce cylinder, right? Mm. And so it was this amazing kind of experience to bounce between the ability to be super precise and organized versus kind of being in this dreamer, innovative state. And I think, it's funny enough. I really do think also creating businesses, you do have to have both sides of those, things, and it's funny enough because in our house, we talk about the right brain and the left brain a lot. And they're 2 potentially diametrically opposed skills, right? It's one, is the seat of innovation and creativity and artistic thinking. And the other is more kind of execution, analytical, and really sticking, to a certain thing. And I mean, those two guys, I just massive amount of respect. And I look back, and that was, a critical point in my life to really be exposed to both of them as mentors.
Yeah, that's really, thank you for sharing that. I think that's so important to keep that in mind, to have both of those perspectives. And if we can, perhaps your career would have been different if you were only exposed to one of them, right? But you were exposed to both, and that helped you think in different ways. And I would encourage anybody out there who maybe knows that they're being exposed to one thing that really maybe that precise precision type of thinking, but maybe you don't have exposure to that more creative, thinking outside the box. I would encourage you to get out there and try to find maybe a mentor or somebody, who might help give you that exposure to help you think a little bit differently. I think that's really cool. Well, talking about right brain and left brain, there's one last topic I want to talk to you about. Which one's the artistic one? I forget. Is that right?
I think it's the right side.
Okay. Well, anyways, speaking of artistic ability, I want to just touch a little bit on your son, who's like this artistic prodigy. I've seen this stuff online, and wow, kid's amazing. So to add to the list of like all of the things that you do as being one of the most interesting people in the world, now you are also what's the right word? Manager?
I don't know, art agent, and it's
agent, right? So you're overseeing your son's work. Please tell us a little bit about your son Evan and the work he's doing. And I think it's amazing.
I mean, honestly, it's been a totally crazy ride on that front. So I'll take you back. So when he was in probably 10, we took him, and he's just like he's like a normal, like he's a kid, who, kind of grew up ski racing and, doing lots of fun things like that. And kind of outdoors kid on the water all the time. But when we went, we took him to the Louvre in Paris and MoMA, roughly around the same time. And he was just like staring at these big paintings, and one thing I'm not is the most patient person. So I'd be like, Evan, come on, let's go. We gotta move here. And so then when he came home, he just started wanting to paint on things. And we're like, okay, cool, just, go ahead and paint. So I started painting, but, then it was pretty obvious that he was kind of locked in, and it was like this like Zen sort of process for him, And so then, he decided when he was 11 to do a project on art history and interview some like local people in Kingston around, their art. And so one of them was like a curator, and he's like, oh, I'm an artist too. And she's like, cool. And so, she takes a picture of his thing, puts it online. Then a bunch of people start writing in saying, I want to buy this piece of work.
Wow.
And then this other person that he interviews, sort of said to him, oh, you should apply for this thing. And so he comes back from that, and he's like, hey, I was told to apply for this thing. We're like, okay, cool, just do it,
Mm-hmm.
So then, and we totally forgot about it. And then like 2 or 3 months later, we get this email, and he's like, yeah, I got in this show. And then we kind of look at it, and it turns out to be, it's like Canada's largest jury's art show. And I'm like,
oh, wow.
Then we read the fine print, and I'm like, Evan, I don't think they have any. So he was 12. I go, Evan, I don't think they have any idea you're 12. So we contact them, and they're like, it's a jury show. He's in the show, but you got to take the week off work and kind of hang out with him and stuff. And then the next, so then fast forwarding, we're at the show, and then next thing he's on Canada AM, and then his art career just kind of blows up. And so
that's incredible. Wow.
Now, his work is like being acquired by people in Dubai and New York and all these places. And so when you say RBLB, the second thing is he's launching a clothing line called Right Brain, Left Brain.
Oh, no way.
And so like, honestly, like I've been to New York Fashion Week and Paris Fashion Week, and the people who he hangs out with, like they're NBA people. And like, so
what?
It's this insane sort of situation where, I'm pulled into his world, and it's a super interesting world. And one that, I mean, it's interesting because as a father, I'm there, to make sure it doesn't get too crazy,
mm-hmm.
And make sure the demands on him aren't too much. But as a kind of a fan of, like, I'm a huge NBA fan, and so to hang out with some of these guys, like, we had dinner with Rudy Gay, in Paris and stuff like that, and it's a fun situation for sure.
Oh my goodness, that's incredible. How old is he now, Evan?
He's 18. He's 18.
Oh my God! Wow, that is incredible. Wow, really, such a cool story, and I bet a lot of fun for you to kind of just be along with him on that ride too. That's awesome.
Yeah, it is great.
All right. So There are two questions that I ask every guest at the end of every single podcast. So I'm going to do that in just a second. Before we do that, I'd love for you to share where can people find you or learn more about yourself or OptoCase or med school or all these other things?
Yeah, sure. Probably the easiest thing is just hit me up on LinkedIn, so Sanjay Sharma, MD on LinkedIn. And then just, yeah, feel free to hop in, if you're an optometrist, we've got a ton of resources there for you. So that's optocase.com. And then, if you want to, even if you're an optometrist or anyone else, if you want to access med school, it's MEDSKL.com. It's a free open access platform. So you can have fun with that as well.
Yeah, great. Awesome. So the two last questions that I ask every guest on the podcast. The first one is, if we could hop in a time machine and go back to a time in your life that was difficult, a point where you were struggling, you could share the moment if you'd like, but more importantly, what I'd love to hear is, what advice would you give to yourself at that point?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I don't know if I was necessarily struggling, but one thing that I do kind of think a lot about is, so when I was in medical school, I went down to Stanford and did an elective in California, and it really had a great time. And I'm going to step back for a second to give your junior listeners a piece of advice. So I went down to Stanford, and I didn't go to Stanford, to hang out at the coffee shops. I didn't go to, I didn't go to San Francisco to hang out. I went there to audition. Okay. And so what I meant by that is I had literally read textbooks in ophthalmology. So when I went down there, they knew that I was all business, and they knew. So at the end of it, they're like, yeah, we would love to accept you. And so, it was kind of one of these funny things where, I had to make the choice between Queens or Stanford. And I don't know if you saw the movie, what's one with Matt Damon, the one that they won the Academy Award for.
Good Matt Damon
and Good Will Hunting. And I think there's a line by Robin Williams. It's, it's always about the girl. Like he thinks about that. He had that ticket for the playoffs. Well, so the reason I didn't go down to Stanford was my girlfriend, who's now my wife of, 27 years or something. At that time it was going to be a coast to coast relationship. And I was like, yeah, it's not going to happen, but it would have been kind of cool in the early 90s to be kind of immersed, at the early days of technology. So that's something. It's not a regret, but it's kind of one of these things where I was like, could I put my wife in the plane and got her over there as well? I don't know. So
yeah,
but I guess I don't live with a lot of regrets. I mean, I just think, what's put in front of you, that's a hurdle, was meant. It's all about trying to improve yourself. Like even at this stage, I've got coaches and different things. I take classes all the time. I'm learning different things. I make a lot of mistakes and I try to learn from them. Right. So there's not a really kind of a negative thing if it's a mindset thing, right? Where you just go, this thing happened to me. Yeah. Okay. That's cool. Or even when I'm talking to my kids, like, this happened to you, analyze it. Like what, own your part in that problem, and then rectify it. And so it's just a learning lesson. It's not a negative thing.
Right. You win or you learn, I guess, is sort of the maxim there. I think that's Nelson Mandela maybe, but the line from the movie is, I got to go see about a girl, right? I think that's what he says. And then even at the end of the movie, that's the note he leaves, going to see about a girl. That's awesome. That's and what, I'm going to say, it sounds like you made the right decision, at least.
Absolutely.
That's fantastic. But I can see how that was a difficult decision. I mean, Stanford, and obviously that place is a hub for innovation, has been for so long. And but you still managed to create all the innovation that you have living there in Ontario. So that's awesome. So the final question is, everything that you've achieved up until now, how much of it would you say is due to luck and how much is due to hard work?
Wow, that's a good question. You know what? Like you sound like you're a deep reader. You listen to a lot of different podcasts, and I don't know if you've had a chance to listen to much Gary Vaynerchuk or Gary Vee or not. But I think, he comes up with a really good point. And that's, there's no better time in history. We've really won the lottery, right? And if you think about it, here in Canada, the United States, we are just unbelievably lucky in terms of healthcare, in terms of education, in terms of, we don't have to worry about drinking water, just everything. You look at the number one, kind of predictor of health really is maternal education. So if you look in some of these developing worlds, if you can actually get maternal education at higher levels, you're going to be dramatically escalated or elevated. And so we've just really won in so many ways, being born here. And now I was born here in Canada, and just, leveraging everything that the infrastructure that's been here. Knock on wood, we've been healthy. So it's all of those things that you just sort of go, that's luck in essence. So if I had to put, a number down, maybe 70-80% has been out of my control. It's just being at the right place, the right time, the right country, that kind of stuff. Having said that, if you look at the denominator of, people entering medical school, you sort of say, well, there maybe is something a little bit different that I've been able to do than other people. And there's no judgment on that. It's just being true to who you are. So, I have tremendous amount of respect for people, who do, maybe it's a mom or father who, choose not to do a career and spend their time taking care of a sick family member, or, really, and I've, had some close friends who, have been very, very challenged in that way. So, it's for executing against my vision. I feel pretty good about that. But again, it's just kind of the way that it's something deep within that I was exposed to a lot of different things when I was younger. And I'm just trying to paint on the canvas of my life, I guess,
That's awesome. Well, I think it takes a lot of humility, especially somebody in your position who has achieved a lot of things in their career and continues to, to put that larger percentage of that, to answer that question by saying, 70-80% is luck, or predetermined. If anything, you don't want to call it luck. I think a lot of people have a problem with the word luck, but out of your hands sort of thing. That's pretty amazing that you would describe it that way. So awesome. Thank you very much for that answer. I think it was really insightful. Great. Any final words of wisdom that you would like to impart on us here before we wrap up?
I just think, because this is, an optometry show, I do really want to, come back to the concept of, there's a great amount of utility and nobility in service, right? And so, even though we've talked a lot about, kind of the innovation agenda, which is, something that I'm super passionate about, I think it's all rooted in terms of, trying to help people. And I just, I go back to eat, every day that I'm in the clinic, doing that one-on-one experience, trying to help someone who needs your skills, I think is an unbelievably rewarding, career. And just at the end of the day, if you don't do anything else, but just help, someone who needs your skill sets, to the point where they can see better, to the point where, if they're a diabetic, you're preventing them from ending up with end-stage diabetic retinopathy or macular degeneration. That is a pretty cool way, to go down with your heartbeats, for sure.
That's fantastic. Yeah. Thank you very much. I think we often do forget about that. We're trying to help somebody, help other people, and have that empathy for others to try to help them. That's really great. Well, thank you again, Dr. Sharma. I really, really appreciate having you on the show. I think we're probably going to have to do another episode, because there's a bunch of other topics that we kind of just barely touched on that I'd love to go down the rabbit hole on some of those if we can, but I really appreciate your time and everything today. Thank you very much. And thank you everybody who's tuned in, whether you're watching on YouTube or you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever it is. Thank you so much for your time. Again, don't forget to share, take a screenshot, throw it up on Instagram, like, review, all the things that you're supposed to do. See you again in the next episode.